Anton Chaitkin. Thank you for joining me today. It's wonderful to see you. How are you?
Good. It's a great day when we can talk about solving the world's problems. It's raining outside right now, but it's bright and sunny in the world of ideas and the future, which can be made better by these ideas.
Well, your ideas certainly are a light that shines bright in my life. Your classic book, Treason in America, is my all time favorite book. I take it with me on vacation wherever I go. In case the other book I'm reading gets boring, I can always open your book. I also have your latest book, Who We Are, Volume 2, which is fantastic, dealing with the period of American history in the late 1800s, and would love to get into the weeds a little bit with you on the history of oligarchy and the history of the American system. But before we do that, I just wanted to ask you about anything that you're currently working on, how things are going, and if you have any recent scoops you'd like to share or anything like that.
Well, I am working on the first chapter, the first few chapters really, of volume three of Who We Are. It'll go from the 1890s into the all the way up through to our present time. Um, and I've got a lot of scoops on what the U.S. was doing to make the world better in the 1890s and across into the early 1900s, and the coup d'état against the American government, led by Teddy Roosevelt and really J.P. Morgan. Um, One other thing that's going on that's of interest to me is that the Trump administration made the decision to uh, reinstall the statue of Confederate General Albert Pike in Washington, D.C. It was torn down by a mob during the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020. They weren't that concerned with what was in the background, but I was one of the leaders of a movement with the LaRouche organization in the 1990s, where we had rallies there at the statue, trying to educate people about that. But the real issue involved with this, and I'm going to be doing an interview for a TV program uh, tomorrow at the statue. But the real issue there is who's running the government. This Albert Pike, this high up Freemason and Ku Klux Klan founder, uh, this is the government behind the government. This is the international uh, Anglo American establishment that has always been at war with the nation state, United States, and other republics and other countries, whether republics or not, that wanted to advance. And this establishment is really has a history of being a terroristic attacker against the advancement of civilization. That is the establishment right now. That's the so-called deep state. It's not just in the government. It's transatlantic in particular. They believe in war. They believe in any kind of terror and discouragement of advancement, for better wages, for better conditions. And so this is putting that Pike statue back up again is a decision made by the Trump administration, but by whom, really? Obviously, Trump didn't study this guy. He doesn't know anything about it. And so uh, we see this everywhere where decisions like this are made to really to rally their forces, their little clique, their faction. So that's of great interest to me, and I'm going to have some fun with this, in contesting this and showing what it's really all about.
Um, so you said that's going to be on TV. I hope that you'll share that on your
Yeah,
Substack
I
so we
will.
can
I'll
watch that
share
because I very
the
much would love to
images.
see that.
I don't know what they're going to show on TV, but little TV program is being made. So, but the greater question is what was the uh, this American system that these Ku Klux Klan or Confederate or British Empire leaders tried to stop. What was the blossoming of civilization in the creating of machine industry, higher wages, better conditions in not only North America but beginning to do that all over the world, emanating from the American system leaders in the United States and various times. What was that? That's the key. Uh, and there were progressive nationalist leaders all over the world in many different countries who had the same kind of thinking about building up the potential high wage skilled labor potential of their countries in cooperation with other countries. That's the real question of history. To find this thread, this motif of fighting for advancement, science, industry, statecraft, looking for the advancement of their own country and others. That's the real center of world history.
I'm glad that you went there because I fully agree, and I had hoped that we could explore that topic a little bit. One of the things that really attracted me to your work and the work of the LaRouche movement when I first encountered it in 2009 and 2010s was that I cut my teeth. I was very very young socialist left leaning guy. I cut my teeth on the anti globalization, anti free trade movements. I was in Quebec City in April 2001 protesting against the free trade area of the Americas. So when I encountered your work, one of the things that resonated with me was how much you were opposing British free trade policies. And I had never been exposed to the American system, the protectionist school. All you really learn in school is that protectionism is antiquated and it doesn't work. And so that's just, what I knew about it. And one of the most attractive things was this emphasis from American system leaders on how proud they were of how their system not only uplifts the living standards of the population, but is also a high wage economy. And that really flies in the face of a lot of socialist doctrine that socialism is the only way for workers to garner a decent wage. And so I really appreciated learning that from you um, back when I was first getting into this.
The best leaders in American history who were progressive nationalists that I've been describing were killed, were assassinated. Uh, People who stressed the elevation of human beings, dignifying them with higher wages and better conditions. And you can cite some of these people in history, the obvious leaders that I'm talking about. Alexander Hamilton, shot to death by this scoundrel Aaron Burr. Uh,
Father of Wall Street, Aaron Burr.
in a way, father of Wall Street, yeah, father of the scams that led into what everything bad about Wall Street. And then Abraham Lincoln, shot to death by Booth as part of a very well documented international organized criminal ring trying to overthrow the whole government of the United States on behalf of the imperial system, the British system, the Southern Confederacy, cheap labor system. Uh, President McKinley was a leader throughout his political career a leader of the uh, protectionists and the one who fought to put the Republican Party together with labor and the rights of labor. He got famous in the 1880s for defending striking coal miners who were arrested on charges of riot and assault. And he argued in the court about the if you want to have people be peaceful laborers, you've got to give them good conditions. And he was as president, he was seeking a hemispheric railroad system and the development of industry throughout the hemisphere. So he was shot to death while seeking peace and progress. Uh, John Kennedy, uh, like many other leaders, had shifted as he learned about things, just like Franklin Roosevelt did. They learned about the real history, and they became more and more powerfully minded towards this idea of uplifting mankind, cooperating with other countries, including our opponents in the communist world. Cooperation to just overlook what their governments were doing. That's really none of our business. Our business is to show in a powerful way what can be done to uplift mankind. That's the heritage of the American Revolution. That's the heritage of the Renaissance. It's the heritage of ancient civilization that stressed human beings as being of divine origin and divine destiny. So these are the leaders, the best and most productive leaders, people that produced uh, an actual success of raising living standards and raising industrial and scientific power of our civilization. Those kind of best and successful leaders were the ones who were in the greatest contest with the imperial system and with the imperial drive for war and for obscurity in government. They want to have their behind the scenes groupings uh, and influence running things for the degradation. So this is a profound and constant fight between the two sides that you find when you're studying the history of the advances of industry and science anywhere in the world. You see the same thing, the same contest.
So this podcast is called Overcoming Oligarchy. It's one of the animating questions of my life is trying to understand what is oligarchy, why does it seek to debase and destroy populations around the globe, and what do we need to do as humanity to finally be rid of this scourge of oligarchy? So in your mind, going back to, let's say, going back to Venice, because it's hard to go back further to understand the origins of Venice and even the precursors. But going back to, say, Venice, and then the Dutch, and then the British, what do you see as characteristics that are kind of universal to oligarchy? What is their centers of power and control, and why do they seek to debase humanity in the way that they do?
You can only see this in the contest between the two sides. Uh, if you look at Venice versus Florence in the time of in the 1400s, let's say, um, Venice is typified by trade, maritime trade, to seek an advantage and a profit in the relative prices of things. They had some technology and so forth, but they're using intrigue. They're using advantage over others and power over others. and getting people in other countries to move those other countries in covered ways to get their advantage in trade and in their political power. Contrast that uh, with Florence and other parts of Italy, um, and of course you can't. It's not 100% good in one place and 100% bad in the other.
Hmm.
Clearly, Florence and Venice are both cities, and there's something good in cities all the time. There's always ideas and artists and so forth. But the tendency, the characteristic there in Florence, the Medici were manufacturers, and they had skilled labor and beautiful clothing that they were making, and expert products, and there was a great deal of uh, uh, combination of intellectual and artistic and other advances going on that fed into the product that and the skill that was developed in the Renaissance. The Renaissance was not simply painting and ideas and literature. It was also the development of actual, uh, uh, machinery of a certain type, and but skills and capital was put together. So you had some banking, you had some money in Florence, but you also had this manufacturing base, and their products were going up to the north in England and Holland and so forth. Um, in Holland, you have this you have a contrast between the manufacturers, the inventors, the scientists on the one hand, this problem solving and profound thinking going on in when the people are looking to develop science and look into the other worlds that are not visible, like the microscopic world and the astronomical world. And then you contrast that with the basically terroristic criminals who go out into the empire and go into the far places in the East Indies and begin setting up intrigue and regime changes and murder and mining, where they're not developing anything. They're not raising skill levels. They're not bringing the intelligence and great advances of the West into these other places. So by oligarchy in the most useful sense, you're talking about people who are doing things engaged for their power and their identity in this kind of imperial advantage over the other. It's what they do. It's not just their organization internally or what some of their beliefs or their families or something. It's the what they get nations and powerful societies to do that ultimately breaks down civilization. That really is going to end up breaking down civilization, and they have no love for civilization. They in many ways they despise it, even though they go to concerts or they have rich tapestries and books and so on and so forth. Uh, so they enjoy different products of civilization, but they're working to destroy it. So this is something that people need to look at very directly, and not because they're going to get revenge and justice against these mighty oligarchs, but rather to look like the best and most productive leadership that we've had in the past anywhere in the world. How do you solve the problems of mankind? That's the real issue. If you're aiming to solve the problems, you're organizing politics and society and industry and science to do that, you're going to run into a contest with this oligarchy. And that's where you have to knock them out. You got to rally people to solve problems. That's the way you do the successful war against this oligarchy. To solve the problems of mankind in cooperation with others, step across the lines of nation, respecting nations, respecting peoples, respecting ethnic and religious and all these things, but work together to solve mankind's pressing, really desperate problems of poverty, of disease, of war, to stop the wars, to stop the conflicts. They have to be outlawed. And you outlaw them by getting, really solid forward motion to solving the problems, getting the infrastructure, getting the water shortages solved, getting the electric power shortages solved, getting science centers set up, stopping the warfare in Africa, stopping the warfare in Asia, stopping conflicts in South America. The oligarchy that's in our government in the United States, that has a controlling interest in our government, and especially, again, since the murder of Kennedy, they're still there with Trump. So who's organizing this warfare in the Caribbean to attack the so-called drug cartels of Venezuela, to make war on Venezuela? Trump didn't invent this. This is invented in the 19th century by the Southern slave owners and the people backing them internationally. They made war in Mexico. They made war in Cuba, all this stuff. This is an old joke, in a sense, with murderous, laugh lines. And Alan Dulles did this, and the Dulles brothers, and the overthrow of the government of Guatemala in the 50s and so forth. And it's known to everyone. It's known not only in the oligarchy, but to any sensible person, that if you are hostile to a country and its government, and you carry out attacks, sanctions or military threats, regime change or the threat of regime change, what you're doing is causing that country to be opposed to your country. You're causing hatred and instability, so that the only outcome will be terrorism and a disaster to you and them. That's known in advance, and therefore the reason that it's being done is to cause the harm to the United States as well as to Venezuela. That's the purpose of it. That's what you want to study what's going on. Find out who's doing that. I guess some people might have the resources, but you have to ask the right questions. Why and who is somebody carrying out actions of warfare and the threat of warfare that is known in advance will cause hatred and violence against the United States of America, or against, let's say, against Israel and the Jews, when they carry out these horrific genocidal acts against their neighbors? What's the purpose of that? Well, it's to cause permanent war, permanent suffering, and a catastrophe for Western civilization. That's the purpose of it. And it's easily to be shown when you look at the history in the United States with the Southern Rebellion and the people who had long not wanted to have industry and advancement, and the British who backed them up and wanted only cheap labor in plantations. The plantation system continued after this Civil War in the South with sharecropping and cheap labor. And they have that kind of plantation as the motif all over the world. It's not just banana plantations or something like that. It's also and other raw materials, rubber plantations in the Congo, but it's also mining and cheap labor factories. I guess today they produce, cell phones or something, but this is not industrialization. This is not advance. It's the plantation system as a world system. The other system is what China and Russia are leading, and what the USA in the past were the leadership for. I sort of am the expert on that end of it, what on the history of how we were leading the way to advancement in civilization in the Republic period.
Um, I really like what you said about China and Russia. I feel like, in the early 2000s, China was held up as the model by these free trade, globalization proponents, that China is going to be the sweatshop of the world, and they're going to make all our stuff for free, and we're going to have no tariffs, so we'll bring it in cheap and you can buy it all at the dollar store and everybody's going to do better, right? And then China did what they weren't supposed to do, which is reinvest the money that they were making along similar lines to the American system leaders. People call China a communist country, but I would say it's much more akin to a state capitalist country.
Yeah,
I mean, 70% of the Chinese economy is private enterprise, and you have all sorts of state banks for agriculture and for industry that are very, very Hamiltonian in nature. Um, what you were saying about Venezuela, it seems like it's basically the antithesis of the Monroe Doctrine, which Teddy Roosevelt, with his Roosevelt corollary, completely began the process of destroying. Would you say that the Monroe Doctrine was sort of an anti-oligarchical principle in foreign relations?
the Monroe Doctrine was promulgated under the in the presidency of James Monroe with John Quincy Adams, Secretary of State. And this was, first of all, the setting for it is the growth of America's progressive nationalism at that time. We, the uh, the laws for higher tariffs, for the use of Army engineers and so forth, came up in Congress toward the end of the Monroe administration. And so, in the same period as the designers of the Monroe Doctrine for foreign countries, for Latin America, were in the same period when they were doing that foreign policy, they were working fast and furious to get the first phase of industrialization in the United States. So they had this idea of bringing about a higher level of living standards of the general population through a shift of industry and agriculture to mechanization, where the individual laborer is going to be more valuable. How do you put a higher value on human life? If you're a real humanitarian, you think that human life is precious. So you want to conduct your politics and your education and your society leadership to promote people valuing labor at a higher level and paying people better. You want workers to become more valuable objectively, be more skilled, be able to command new machinery and so forth. So that's the point of view. And there was the first phase of industrialization starting in the 1820s with the full flowering of it in the 1840s. But it came from this nationalism, high tariffs, Bank of the United States, infrastructure, very important canals and railroads to get a a mass market, get a wider scope for industry and agriculture. And if you have a bigger market, then you can have economies of scale and so forth. You could pay for real technological advances. So their outlook for Latin America was that this idea of the republic should have some breathing space, not be set upon by these royalists or economic royalists, as FDR called them, from Europe. And John Quincy Adams, who was Secretary of State and then became president, spoke out against the United States ever having colonies. And of course, you had this faction within the United States, the imperial faction that wanted that. But the Monroe Doctrine was based on the idea of the republic being a universal concept. It didn't mean that we're going to impose a republic on somebody else. It meant that you were devoted to national sovereignty. And the national sovereignty idea in economics is in protectionism. So that was the idea behind it. So now you have this question about, you said, well, is the Monroe Doctrine being violated by what the government's doing against against Venezuela? Now, Venezuela is led by a leftist, basically dictator, and they have a really bad economy, largely because they've been sanctioned and attacked. And the only reason they have a president like that is because they're under attack. They wouldn't. It's just like Cuba with Fidel Castro. Everybody rallied around him because their country was constantly under attack, and so forth. So and leaders feel they have to be more authoritarian if they're subject to regime change all the time. So the question for the United States and for the world community is, in countries that are not fully developed but have resources. Venezuela has oil. There's all kinds of resources in South America, and taken as a whole. How do you get those countries to be peaceful and advancing and to pose no threat to anyone, to their neighbors or to the United States or to anyone? It's obvious the way you do that, and you go back to the American outlook as opposed to the Anglo-American terroristic outlook that is cheap labor and chaos. Remember that imperialism means chaos wherever it goes. The American system of protectionism and guided credit for industry and projects that are partly sponsored by government or fully sponsored. This is a system of peace and peaceful development, calmness, new communities developing with labor, people who work, having their own homes. I guess some of these degraded oligarchs, living in Venice or England or wherever, view all this as a very boring existence, to have families, to have grandchildren, to have the means for the ordinary person to live in a decent way. They view that as very boring. Teddy Roosevelt talked about war as exciting.
Yeah.
And that's their point of view. But they're against civilization. So the question is, how do you solve the needs of the people in Venezuela or some similar country? Where do the drugs come from? Why would people be in a drug cartel or soldiers for that drug cartel? You have this in countries like Somalia in Africa, where they have pirates. It's known widely, the classical case is young people, teenagers, are brought in as soldiers for these crime syndicates because there's nothing else for them to do. Why not develop these countries into modern centers like the best leaders of Africa that the British would always overthrow or the CIA would overthrow or murder? Why not develop all of these countries into modern centers of science, industry, and good living? Why not do that? That's the issue. It's not a complicated question. So if you want to solve the drug problem, you also have to develop the United States again and get people off of opioids and desperation and suicide and PTSD for the next couple of generations. So without these crazed foreign wars that our enemies have brought about. The enemies use our government to destroy our interests again and again and again. It's an old story. That's what's happening now. Who's doing this kind of stupid warfare in the Caribbean? Bringing an aircraft carrier down there uh, to have a war with some country like Venezuela. What's the logic in that? Same logic as I guess Netanyahu has in making war that is known in advance that generations of your people will live in terror if you do this. Why do that? Why live in terror for generation after generation? Why don't you just settle down and make some industry and progress and have cooperation with these countries? Just Trump go on television and say, "I'm sorry, we made a mistake after Kennedy was murdered uh, by these clowns in the upper oligarchy, and we made a mistake to go out of industrializing and cooperating with other countries to do it. So let's cooperate with these people. Let's foil these enemies of our country by making peace with Russia and China in particular. And then America can be the leader of building up science and industry in the world like we used to be." That's all you have to say. Then you've got the whole thing. Then the world rallies behind you. But this force of these clowns, these degraded people in this what you call the oligarchy, uh, that have their power within our government and other governments. That's got to be overcome by people brave enough to think through this whole history and think to focus as hard as you can on solving the needs of the human race, solving their needs for technology, their needs for higher living standards. How do you do that? How do you cooperate to do that? That's the road to success in beating these devils.
Staying on Israel for 1 second because it's very topical, and you are a Jewish man yourself.
That's right.
Um, I see online, especially, anti Semitism towards all Jews, not just anti Zionism, but actually like classic anti Semitism is growing. I've been saying for a while now that Benjamin Netanyahu is one of the best things to ever happen to anti Semitism because his actions are fueling this growth in it. And I have I have always been pro-Palestinian from my earliest days of being politically aware, but I never was somebody who would say, it's all the Jews or anything like that. And I think one of the great things about the LaRouche movement was, Lynn himself would say constantly, there's one race, the human race. And you sort of got this intellectual armor from the work that you guys did and understanding that it's not a Jewish conspiracy or anything like that, and it's not even a British conspiracy. It's you have to understand oligarchy itself. But so to all these people that are becoming more and more anti-Jew, not even anti-Zionist, but just saying it's all Jews, and because I really see this idea growing, especially in the US and in the Western world. What would you say to people? Like, how do we understand Israel? How do we understand what it's doing? How do we understand Zionism?
Well, when I read RT, Russia Today, uh, on the internet, and you go to the end of an article, and then you get this whole bunch of anti-Semitic ravings going on, and you think about what's the mindset of somebody who is going to solve the problems of the world by attacking Jews. Um, they're not, for one thing, a lot of that is the FBI and similar agencies. And I think within Russia, you probably have the same thing. You had that back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, where the Witte, WITT, Count Witte, who was the leader of the reformers and the people who wanted to develop Russia and increase its power, was in a contest with these reactionary oligarchs, the Russian aristocracy in league with British intelligence. They were against the central state, and they would whip up people into these pogroms against the Jews. And so, he wasn't particularly concerned about Jews. I think he might have married a Jewish woman. I'm not even sure. But uh, but the real issue is how do you develop the power of society to solve its problems? And so people who are bound up in this anti-Semitism are not looking to do that. Now, when I went to Israel in 1960, what was it, 62 or 63, and I was pretty shocked by the racism of Jewish people. And especially I saw this in in like among police or some military people, I don't know, but others as well. Racism towards Palestinians and towards Arabs. I talked to the Palestinians there. One time I was in jail for a couple of days for stealing an empty milk carton from the street. I wanted to cash it in, so I was put into jail. And I walked around the courtyard, and I talked to the Palestinians who were in that jail. And I was really shocked at the civil rights, civil liberties disaster within Israel at that time. This is 1960, I don't know, 63 or something like that. And I reflected back on Jewish people that I had known in California, where I grew up, or that people that I had known about in the broader world who were in arts, music, or science. Not movies, but real arts and so forth, and scientists, and people that historically had been committed to uplifting the mind and the hearts of human beings through their art and through their science, and committed to thinking in a way that reflected a really magnificent idea that you have from the holy prophets and from the best, not only in their religion but in other religions as well. So how do you get from that to this degraded Jewish state that was really, for the most part, intended to bring about this catastrophe? FDR knew that this shouldn't happen when, the last few months of his life, when he met with King Saud Ibn Saud and others, and was puzzling over this problem, what to do with these Jewish refugees from Europe. And the Saud told him, don't have them take away the land of Arabs. Have them live among the Germans and get their property from the people that victimized them. Don't do this. You're going to have tragedy. And FDR knew this. But how do you get from this kind of beautiful state of mind of the Jewish artist or scientist to this kind of state of terrorists, like constant, this government and its sponsors in Israel are very much like the concentration camp guards in Nazi Germany and in Poland, who carry out a program of murder without any thought beyond that. Really, they're not thinking of the future of their own people or anything else. They're sort of under a guidance from above. It's all very vague because the Israeli state is intermingled with the Western intelligence agencies and international defense corporations and security corporations and all of its covert activities. It's one apparatus with the Anglo-Americans and some of the stuff in the European Union and NATO. But how does it go from this exalted state of mind of some of these great Jewish artists and scientists to this degraded state in Israel? You have to see the same history. It's part of history. We had in the West the two factions at the time of the end of World War II, and it was obviously before. But the two factions are the FDR state of mind and the Churchill state of mind. And there was introduced as American policy after World War II a lurch, a stumble, a falling, a catastrophic loss of mental capacity in diving into this division of the world. Truman was an underling of Churchill through people like Dean Acheson and the Dulles brothers, particularly Acheson. But it's not just Churchill. You have this oligarchy, this academic and other leadership, financial, diplomatic. And what they're looking to do is divide the world in a way that it will not be permitted to advance. The Arabs and other Muslim countries will not be permitted to advance. The Africans will be kept in control. And this is the idea of the Cold War, or behind the Cold War. There are many people involved in the Cold War, capitalism versus communism, freedom versus communism, who are patriotic in their thinking, but they're not the leaders of it. They're not the designers of this thing. What's NATO? NATO's a killer machine. They're the people, in my view, they're largely involved in the murder of Kennedy. So this is what was put on the United States and on the West by this faction to prevent anything like what America had done in the past from happening again, and put America on the side of the empires, French Empire, British Empire, and so forth. And Israel was set up within that dynamic. And people, the leaders of Israel, just like the Jews in the United States or the best leaders of the United States, never addressed this problem. Kennedy addressed it himself in a certain way as a senator in the 1950s when he was the chairman of the Africa subcommittee of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and he was committed to the U.S. taking the side of African and Arab nationalism. And we said we can't compete with the communists for influence without using our heritage as a revolutionary country, as people who are trying to advance mankind and take the side of independence and national sovereignty. That's what we stand for, isn't it? So he was addressing this as FDR was doing late in his administration. That's the real issue, and Israel never had a chance of there were people who wanted to cooperate with Arabs. There was Yitzhak Rabin. There were other good people there. But the state of Israel was set up for this purpose of chaos and against the obvious need of North Africa, the Middle East, Southwest Asia to develop strong, powerful nation states equipped with nuclear science, equipped with doing the space program, equipped with all the modern industry. You have these centers of intelligence, the Lebanese, the Palestinians. These are among the most brilliant people in the world, centers of smart people. Egypt, there are many centers. Iran is brilliant people. And the idea of this Anglo-American catastrophe faction is that they will not be permitted to improve civilization. You got to keep them off balance, keep them in a catastrophe all the time. Now that's being done by Netanyahu. So that's what's going on. And people who look at this category of humanity called Jews and think they're going to solve anything by dealing with a category of people, they don't have their heads on straight. You're not looking at the actual history of the world or the future of it, which is solving human needs. It's solving the problems of people to have access to the products and the homes and the education and the scientific outlook that they need. How do we do that? How are nations empowered to help their people to do that? We need powerful nations in the Middle East, in Southwest Asia, and Africa needs powerful nations that can cooperate with each other. And let's study this history. Everybody should study the history of the accomplishments and where that was pulled off away from the accomplishments by this enemy terroristic oligarchy.
I guess I I question, this debasing of Judaism, because opinion polls now show globally 95% or so of Jews are pro-Zionist, and
That's
the
not
other
true.
the
Wait,
other 5%,
that's not true. I
that
mean,
might be Israeli
maybe you're
propaganda. That's
saying it
just that's
in
just what
some
I've
way.
heard.
No, if you look in the United States, most of the Jewish people in the United States are opposed to what Israel is doing.
No, no,
But
they
they're
might be
not.
opposed to what Netanyahu's doing. Yes, no, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that they are pro-Zionist and they are
Yes, okay.
pro-Israel,
Yeah.
and then the other
Historic.
5% are typically very Orthodox Jews. One that I follow, Rabbi Shapiro in New York City, he talks about how Zionism is the antithesis of Judaism, and what Israel is doing is the antithesis, that actual Judaism, the tradition of Orthodox Judaism, if you want to call it that, is pacifist. That Jews were traditionally very peaceful, pacifist people, much like Jesus told Christians to be as well, and that um, that's the tradition of that the Torah teaches. And so, how did we get here? How did we get to um, so many Jews now supporting Zionism and supporting, the creation of a state on top of people that live there and kicking them out of their homes and, building settlements. And Zionism, it was originally a British creation, correct? I mean, it originated from the British Empire. Um, the the document whose the
Balfour.
Balfour Declaration,
Yeah.
right? It was Rothschilds and Lord Balfour. So is that how we can better understand the creation of Israel? Like that it, because they were offered other locations around the world as well, and it was, no, we need to be here in the Middle East, in this part of the world, and this Zionist ideology, which has grown up now that God promised us this land, even though most of them are atheists. Um, yeah,
Well,
I want to have an answer to the people who are saying, oh, it's just Jews, and the problem is Jews. The problem is not Jews. The problem is violent violent Zionism and settler colonialism,
well,
just like the British practiced.
first of all, let's be clear that there's a whole set of wars going on, a large number of wars that are going on right now. The Ukraine-Russia war is a long-standing war of the Anglo-Americans against Russia. And by Anglo-Americans, I mean this oligarchy, that's the war faction, the imperial war faction. They have other wars. In Africa, there's a lot of wars. Uh, so this thing with Israel has just become notorious, and the insane level of crime involved with this catches people's imagination, and sympathy for the victims. But it's not it's part of an overall policy from the West. Remember, the bombs come from Western manufacturers, from Western defense apparatus. So that, put it in that light. But then go back to what you were talking about. What is Zionism? Well, yeah, there is an origin within the Jewish tradition of identification with, with Jerusalem, identification with the Israelites going to that area out of Egypt, and so forth. And you say, and Passover next year in Jerusalem. I don't know when they started saying that. Maybe that's just a modern thing. But it doesn't really matter that some aspect of some religion has this emphasis or this sentiment. It definitely was developed as a British strategy, imperial strategy, by the worst elements in Britain. I remember that Teddy Roosevelt himself endorsed Zionism. I think it was 1917. The Jews need to go to Palestine. What does he know about any of that? It's just because his British friends wanted to do it,
Mm-hmm.
and had their, he's talking about the balance of power against the non-white people that need to be kept off balance and
Yeah, and
governed by.
Teddy Roosevelt was a disgusting anti-Semite, actually, if you read
I
any of
don't
the.
know. I know that his friends were. They were violent anti-Semites. The late Henry Adams and the other members of the Adams family betrayed their grandfather John Quincy Adams in that respect. But the problem in thinking about this is that there is no such thing as a history of Jews per se. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's like trying to get a history of Freemasonry, or a history of some state or even a nation in itself. There is no such thing. To find out what happened and what people did who were in a particular place or in a particular group, you can't just look at what they did isolated from the history of the time that governs the way people think, what they do, what the choices are, what the fight is all about. That's the biggest sickness in today's world is the lack of caring about the fate of the large mass of mankind, and trying to look seriously like an adult at the past, the present, and the future of the nations of the world. That's the big sickness, because those are our neighbors now. Ever since you got electronic communication, telephones, telegraphs, fast travel, and interchange of people, we now have a human community on this planet. And so the sickness is to simply look as if you were a filthy peasant, degraded, and you can only speak 300 words in your vocabulary, and you're living in some hovel in Russia or Germany or I don't know, some other place in Europe or some place in Asia where there's no knowledge among the mass of the people, and only a few people have knowledge, and this peasant doesn't know anything outside his own village. People like that think in terms of a group or one place. They don't see the world that exists. People who are fixated on Jews or fixated on any group or any state are not, they don't really care about, because they don't even know about the fate of the world and the fate of major regions of the world. People have these notions about America, either as a great and noble place that's always right, or as an evil empire. And they have maybe some notion about history, but it was given to them by people who were deliberately concocting false history, because the falseness is looking at one element of mankind in isolation. It's always false, and it's actually false for thousands of years in the past. Any real history and archaeology of mankind always shows an international movement of people and trade and knowledge all over the world. It's a lot of this is and the more you know about it, the stranger and more interesting it gets to be. But right now, the greatest urgent need, when you're looking at this genocide in Gaza, and I guess the West Bank as well, is to get above it and focus on how we are going to get Americans and other people that are maybe in a position. And there's a lot of revolt against this globalist gang in Europe and elsewhere around the world, not just in the global South, but in Europe as well. You know, these regimes, Hungary, I guess Czech, Slovakia, and within every country. How are we going to get people to soberly look at the needs of people to be solved, where we say, what would be the solution, the immediate solution for these countries, for this Israel-Palestine issue? The immediate solution is that the larger countries as nations, USA, Russia in particular, and maybe India, I don't know, but the larger nations simply coming to the conclusion that this state of war must be ended, that it cannot be tolerated, that it's dangerous. The danger to ourselves and the rest of mankind is the issue, is that would be a motivating issue. Right now, we're getting into new wars in the United States. Venezuela, Trump is ordered the Defense Department to start testing nuclear weapons again.
Mm-hmm.
Insane, insane,
Insane. Yeah.
right? Who? Look at the history. The testing is associated with threats of war that bring you closer to war itself. Forget about the contamination of the atmosphere, which was a was a big concern. But the question is, how do we where do we find people who will devote themselves to telling the truth, that we need to get answers to the needs of people. These these are very well known needs and solutions, technological solutions. The movement of energy, that is electricity, the production of electricity, large voltage, and so forth. The movement of fresh water, the building of science centers, the involvement of countries in modern industry and space program and other things that have a quick uh, uplift, building of high speed trains and so forth, the way China has done it. These are very well known. It's not a big puzzle.
Right.
The question is the devotion to the bigger picture, solving problems, and for activists and people that are involved in public affairs and comment on the internet and exchange, these articles. I implore people who think and can think. You have to get out of looking at one, devoting yourself to one so-called issue, because by doing so, you have gotten into the most horrifying falsehood. And that we have the best way of fighting that in the dialogues of Plato, who says you've got to get above these things and look for the truth above these things. You've gotten yourself in a muddle, however moral you think you are, by attacking the injustice. You're in a muddle. You're not getting towards a solution. You're simply screaming, and you're largely just screaming to yourself. You've got to be clear in alerting people to the needs of mankind and how they will be solved.
I completely agree with you, and I'm so glad that you said that, because when I look out there, I see so many people falling into this trap. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to discuss the high wage nature of the American system with you, because there is a problem in the West, and the system is failing people, particularly young people. And young people are, as a result, more and more turning towards socialism. They don't see any possibility, any redeeming possibility under a state capitalist system more akin to a McKinley or a Alexander Hamilton model, and they see the only um, solution in socialism. Similarly, because of what's been happening in Israel the last few years, I'm seeing this rise of people like Nick Fuentes, who just a few years ago was a completely fringe character, who he says he's an American nationalist, but he's really a tribalist who wants to pretend that the principles of America are based on whiteness, and that immigrants coming to this country can't be Americans, and blaming it all on Jews. and he's becoming more and more popular, and I kind of despair about it because of that. Um, we'll wrap it up here shortly, but because you're here, there's something ever since I got into the LaRouche movement that I always wanted to know. And since I have somebody here who was involved from the very beginning, I always wondered, because LaRouche himself was a socialist at first, right? He published things under the name Lynn Marcus. And sometime in the late 70s, there was a shift that happened in the movement where he started becoming Lyndon LaRouche and promoting Alexander Hamilton and Abraham Lincoln and the American system. And, you go back and read his stuff as Lynn Marcus to the stuff in the late 70s, early 80s, even. And there's a marked shift. And I was just always curious what was going on there. What's your recollection of that process that occurred within him?
Well, I met Lyndon LaRouche in 1966. My wife and I were among a very small group of people that first took up with him, and we started this movement. Uh, and I was an activist in it for many years, and then until about 2015 or so, 2017, I don't know. But uh, he was, LaRouche was always an independent person, uh, and was trying to focus his mind above the uh, the competing ideologies. He was knowledgeable in both capitalist practices and background and Marxism. He's deeply read in these things, and he was formulating political ideas in relation to Marxism and leftism. That's true, but he was never a comfortable person within the leftist or socialist movement. He was never he was an independent maverick kind of a person, and he was trying to use the power and the creativity of his mind to penetrate what is the real dynamic of building up civilization, of what should be what he called physical economy. And this is developing right straight through the time when he's still talking in terms of Marxism. He had this formulation about you know the Marx the things that Marx should have known about, or that he knew but didn't know, or something like that. In the early 70s, uh, some people, Nancy Spanis and others, were delving into the background of Alexander Hamilton and the American uh, founding, and discovered this element of building civilization in the American Revolution and its follow up. And they brought this in, and LaRouche himself uh, uh, took this up and saw the falsification of history that was done. Marx never knew the history of America or of the republicanism of the West.
And Marx
Adam,
attacked Henry Carey.
he did, but he was ambivalent about this. He also attacked the oligarchy, attacked the empire in many ways, but he was largely ignorant of this split within the West between the Renaissance and the empire, the killer imperialists. And so LaRouche saw this, And there was a flowering within his circle of people doing original work to study history and to study science and to study culture and to get above and beyond and against the falsification of the history and the movement for ugliness and destruction in the arts and the sciences. And we had a great attack against this. Part of that was the development of the idea of the American system and the revival of this idea, which was largely in the LaRouche movement. That's where the revival came about. Alan Salisbury wrote the book, The Civil War in the American System, and reviving the knowledge of Henry Carey. And he was in an earlier generation. This is in the 1970s. So in the 1870s, 100 years before, Carey was known in Russia. He was known in India. He was known all over the world. He was the most well-known and appreciated person in Europe, much to the chagrin of these pompous Anglo-Americans in Boston. So simply reviving this history of the American system, or the knowledge that it existed and the theories. My own contribution is to go back and try to bring out the actual accomplishments and contest all the way through American political history between these two sides, and show that the advancement, the physical and cultural and industrial advancement of the United States is due to the nation builders. Right. So socialism is put on the side right away, because socialism says we're going to reconstruct society in order to advance society. Well, the best leaders within the West, within the United States in particular, are devoted to building up the high-wage industries, the productivity of labor, and regulating as necessary industry and conditions in society for the benefit, that the government exists for the benefit of the people. McKinley had this point of view when he came out of the Civil War, where he was very brave and daring in what he did. He was honored in the war. And he said that the people gave their lives and fought fiercely to defend our government. Now the government owes them a decent existence, and to treat them and to make sure they have a dignified existence. That's their right. They earned that right. They fought for this government in the Civil War.
Right. And that's the only legitimate form of government that can exist, is one that's seeking to build up the people.
That's right. So that's the point of view of the United States, the American outlook. And this Anglo-American gang that now has significant power over our country and over the West doesn't represent the American outlook, and it doesn't even represent the Western outlook. Imperialism is not something that was invented in the West. It's been going on for millennia, right? There's empires in the Middle East and elsewhere. So they've just adopted this form of crime within the West. The contribution of the real West is individual dignity, great scientific advances, mechanization, all these things. None of that comes from imperialists. So people have to take this to heart, that the only legitimate identity of the United States and really of the West is this more humane and successful side, and that imperialism and these wars, all present day wars, are illegitimate. There is no war now that could possibly be justified. We're way beyond that. It's not, you don't have to go back in history and say no war was ever justified. It doesn't matter. What's true now is that you've got to have this cooperation. We're well beyond anybody having a legitimate reason for going to war right now. So you have to be able to say with confidence that the West, and in particular the United States of America, stand for the advancement of civilization. And if they're not doing that, they have to be called to account, because then they're being misled by murderers, and those murderers have to be brought out and brought down. And that's it. You're not going to do that by violence. You're going to do that by understanding that the legitimate government and identity of the USA and the West is the cooperation of our countries for progress of the entire world. And you have to say, no, we're not. We're ending these conflicts, particularly the conflict of the United States with Russia and China. That doing that will put the kibosh on this genocide carried out by Israel now. That won't happen if you have the cooperation of the USA, Russia, and China. That's what's needed right now. You want to solve these problems, get those three countries together. They're the necessary leaders of mankind at the present stage for different reasons for each country. That's all I have time for right now, and I really appreciate the chance to get into these topics, and we should do more of this kind of discussion.
I hope so. I really enjoyed it. So yeah, I definitely would love to talk to you again soon. And yeah, I know you have to go, so we can wrap it up here. Anton's books, Who We Are, Volume 1 and Volume 2, available on Amazon, most likely elsewhere, but it seems everybody buys books on Amazon these days. And you also have a fantastic Substack as well. So I would encourage everybody to go to Substack and look for Anton Chaitkin's Substack there. Anton, thank you so much for being with me today. Be well, and I hope to talk to you again very soon.
Thank you, Sam. You're a good friend.
Thank you, Anton. That means a lot coming from you.